This is an interesting piece by Bail Baydown. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, but it's over at commondreams.com, or .org rather. It's titled, Interest Rate Hikes Won't Solve the Affordability Crisis. And basically what it is, it's a story about inflation and how inflation is arguably the main problem that is causing people to downrank Joe Biden's handling of the economy. And what they're pointing out is that inflation traditionally was viewed as a demand problem, as a demand-side problem. In other words, there's more demand for goods and services than there are goods and services. So people start bidding them up. It's like, Taylor Swift tickets, right? The tickets may be $500, but when they're all sold out, there's an aftermarket, and they start going for $1,000 or $2,000 or $5,000 just to get in. So when things are scarce, their price gets bid up. And so the prevailing wisdom was that there's all this demand for goods and services, for stuff. We want to buy things, and there's not enough things to buy, and so that's driving up prices. In fact, a whole bunch of economists, including Nobel Prize winners like Paul Krugman, are enthusiastic and rapid to point out to you that that's simply not the case. That yes, people had a lot more money than normal as a result of the American Rescue Plan. People had the child tax credit money, and they had the $600 a month, going money, and they had their unemployment money, and they had their loans, the COVID loans and all this stuff. So there was a little more money. So obviously there would have been a certain amount of buying and bidding up stuff, but a lot of that was just returning demand to a marketplace that had lost demand during COVID. Instead, what has happened is that our largest corporations, who have monopoly power in the marketplace, have decided to use that monopoly power to jack up prices because they can, because they have no competition. I mean, monopoly is essentially the opposite of competition. And one of the big things that Republicans have done and defended for years and years is the power of giant monopolies. In 1983, Ronald Reagan ordered the Department of Justice, the FTC, and the SEC to stop enforcing the antitrust laws in America, or to largely stop enforcing them, change the thresholds for enforcement. And as a result, those of you who are old enough to remember 1983, you will remember that prior to 1983, your local mall, and most of them were strip malls, although there were some big malls back then, your local mall was 80–90% small local businesses. Your downtown was a local furniture store, a local clothing store, a local office supply store. Everything was local. You had, individual dentists' offices and doctors' offices and your local bank and your local credit union. And now everything is national, right? You could jump out of an airplane at 60,000 feet and land in any random city in America and look around and have no friggin' clue where you are. Whereas if you had done the same thing 50 years ago, you would immediately, there's the Cheyenne Bank, and there's the Cheyenne Hotel, and there's the Cheyenne Diner. And, you'd know that you were in Cheyenne, Wyoming, in this small town, or a big town, actually, for Wyoming. But nowadays, no. Now it's, Olive Garden and McDonald's and Marriott and Wells Fargo and Bank of America and, all these brands that we all know because they're national, because they have pushed all the smaller businesses out of business. The book I've been serializing over at HartmanReport.com every Sunday is The Hidden History of American Monopoly, and it's how we got here. In fact, Ralph Nader wrote the foreword for the book and called it the most important book on monopoly he'd ever read. This is a crisis for America. Is that because Reagan stopped enforcing the antitrust laws, and no president until Joe Biden has started enforcing them. I don't know if you've been following it. Almost nobody is. But Google right now is being sued for violating the antitrust laws. And I think this is great. I mean, we need to start having some serious antitrust prosecutions in the United States. Now, the Supreme Court's made it even harder, by the way. Back in the 1960s, when Kinney and Buster Brown wanted to merge and become a company that would have controlled 5.6% of the shoe market in America. The Supreme Court said, no, you can't. You can't go over 5% of any one owner in any one marketplace. Well, today, Nike owns 19% of the entire shoe market. It's like it's happened. We're there. You've got basically 5 companies that own most all of our media, 5 companies that own most all of our airlines, 5 companies that own most all of our pharmaceuticals, 5 companies that own most all of our travel systems, you know, travel agencies and things like that. 5 major banks in America. You know, these are cartels. This is not competition. If United raises their price on a particular route $10, Delta does the same thing 5 minutes later. They don't have to sit in a back room and say, hey, let's collude to fix prices. They just track each other. It's easy. They have whole departments devoted to this. How do we squeeze more money out of our customers? Oh, jam more seats into the plane and raise the prices. Oh, let's start charging for baggage. Let's do all. Why? Because we can, because there's nobody competing with us. There was a time in America when we had almost 100 airlines. There was a time in America when we had over 100 car manufacturers. No longer. So what is driving inflation? Well, you know, certainly some of it is, you know, demand, but now we're seeing commercial real estate is in crisis. Residential real estate prices are dropping, or values are dropping. It's getting harder and harder to get a loan. Interest rates are, you know, mortgage rates are around 7-8%. Prime rates are around 5%. The result of this is that credit card debt is going up. In other words, people, just to maintain their lifestyle, we're back to where we were, you know, before the pandemic. People are having to live on their credit cards just to maintain a middle-class lifestyle. So it's not demand. It is corporate greed. And, you know, sadly, the only response that we've had to this is a demand-side response, which is the Fed trying to induce a recession. And they're damn near there. Jerome Powell has been quite successful at this. Now, we're not in recession yet, but there's a whole lot of indicators. A piece in the Wall Street Journal today about how the commercial real estate market is now in crisis. So keep an eye on this. This is also the big thing that Republicans are using to beat up President Biden. And again, you know, the big companies are all in on this. Gas companies jacking up prices. Why? Because they can. Big retail stores jacking up price. Why? Because they can. Amazon did this test. It had a code name even, where they just randomly or not randomly. They're very carefully organized. Jacked up prices on things to see what would happen. They made an extra $1 billion in profit because they have basically monopoly control of the online marketplace. There we go. Meanwhile, oh, and we got 5 big insurance companies too, and we've got, you know, 5 big hospital chains, maybe 6 or 7 now across the United States, but basically we've seen consolidation in those areas as well. To that, Congressman Ro Khanna, who's a regular on this program, I'm assuming he'll be back with us on Friday this week, most likely. You know, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, and Mike Johnson doesn't do something insane. But Congressman Khanna just introduced a state-based, it's called the State-Based Universal Health Care Act. See, here's the problem. Vermont and California have both tried to do single-payer health care. And in both cases, what stopped them was that Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, in order to prevent fraud, because these are federal programs, track the dollars as they go to the states to make sure that those dollars are ending up, you know, paying for actual health care services citizens of those states. So if you're Vermont, for example, with 600,000 citizens and you've got, you know, 70,000 people on Medicare, you know, retired people on Medicare, if you go to a universal health care system in Vermont that is entirely paid for by the state, there is no provision for those 70,000 people on Medicare to have that state insurance. Or more importantly, Vermont probably has about 100,000 low-income people on Medicaid. There's no provision for Medicaid for that money to continue to come into the state. If you say, you know, we're going to do it ourselves, suddenly the Medicaid money vanishes, the Medicare money vanishes, and the state can't afford to do it any longer. So this waiver would be a waiver to those laws around Medicare, Medicaid, and other health programs, WIC, and all these other programs that would say these programs can, instead of directing their money to the individuals in the states, they can direct it to the state itself, and the state can roll that into the money that they are using to pay for the health care for those individuals. We need this. So now might be a good time if you have if you're keeping a list, to call your representatives. This is in the House of Representatives right now. Obviously it's not going to pass with Republicans controlling the House, but still, we need to start building the pressure. Typically, it takes a year, 2 years, 3 years, sometimes 4 or 5 years before a piece of legislation is ripe, before it's got enough support, before it's well known enough that it has enough support that politicians actually take it seriously. So the phone number is 202-224-3121. 202-224-3121. And that gets you to the switchboard in Washington, D.C. And just say, Congressman Khanna has introduced the State-Based Universal Health Care Act that provides waivers for states that want to go single payer. Please support it. That's straightforward. It's that simple. He said, our failing healthcare system, where millions are burdened by debt and nearly half of all Americans report struggling to afford the care they need, has increased the demand for state and federal action. We must empower states, including those such as California and New York, that are working to create state-based single-payer healthcare systems to guarantee that their residents can get the care they need when they need it. Great stuff. Important stuff. This is what we need to be doing. And, this is how Canada got single-payer healthcare all across the nation. The province of Saskatchewan, their equivalent of a state. Saskatchewan did it first. Tommy Douglas was the governor, the premier, and he put into place single-payer healthcare system in Saskatchewan back in the 1960s. And pretty soon, next door, Alberta said, hey, that's kind of cool. We want that. And then Ottawa said, hey, we want that. And then British Columbia, oh, no, we want that. And then, Toronto, or what's the, Ontario said, we want that. And pretty soon the whole country had it. This is how you do it.